Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Okay, so in this lesson, we're talking about identifying a research problem, and this is from chapter 2 of our textbook. Okay, so what's a research problem? Why is it important? Um, And you all did a great job identifying some social justice problems in your post last week. And so, research problems include things like educational issues, controversies, or any concern you have, particularly about your work. And they guide the need for conducting a study. So, what is the issue or problem? It's some questions you can ask yourself when you're identifying a research problem in let's say you're reading a research report. What is the issue or problem being addressed? What controversy leads to the need for the study? What concern is being addressed behind the study? And there may even be a sentence that just says straight out, the problem being addressed in this study is such and such. Usually, the research problem is in the opening paragraphs of the study. It sets the stage for it and tells the reader why the study is important, why they should read it. Now, there are other parts that you're going to find in an introduction um, to a study. You're going to find the research topic or the broad subject matter that's being addressed in the study. The problem is this educational issue or problem. A purpose is the intent or the objective of the study, and then the research questions are those specific things that the researcher wants to know. The specific things that the questions that the researcher would like answered. So, let's take the topic of economic disenfranchisement. Wonder where I got this topic. Let's say the problem is students living in poverty are unable to focus on schoolwork when their basic needs are not met. Okay. The purpose of a study might be to explore how teachers seek to meet the economic needs of students living in poverty. And an overarching research question for the study might be, how do teachers address hunger, homelessness, and lack of clothing among their students who are living in poverty? So we start with this broad topic, economic disenfranchisement, okay? And we gradually narrow, okay? Students who are living in poverty can't focus. Teacher, and then the purpose. How do teachers deal with this? And then the research question, how do teachers deal with these specific aspects of economic disenfranchisement? Okay, you see how that goes from wider to more narrow? Let's look at another example. The placements of the placement of students with disabilities and behavioral challenges. Okay, so here in the U.S., we have this idea of least restrictive environment, right? So if a student has a disability, an identified disability, then the default position is they're going to be placed in a general education classroom. A next step might be in a classroom with the assistance of an aide. A next step, more restrictive, would be in a self-contained classroom or in a classroom where there are other students with disabilities, a classroom for kids with disabilities. And then finally, the most restrictive environment might be a separate school setting. Okay. So let's say we're going to define the problem is some students with disabilities who have challenging behaviors are placed in general education classrooms and their behavior disrupts the learning of their peers. Other students are placed in self-contained classrooms that don't meet their academic needs. Okay. Um, so often the content in a self-contained classroom, what's being taught in a classroom that only has students with disabilities, may not be at the same level as the content in a general education classroom. particularly if most of the students are not at that level. Okay, so the purpose of a study might be to describe the current placements of students with disabilities and behavioral challenges and the supports that are needed to promote learning. And usually the purpose is going to be limited to a specific school or district. Um, a research question might be, what are different configurations of placement and support in use in my district, right? And what do teachers see as the benefits and drawbacks of those configurations? Or what are the student characteristics associated with placement configurations? So, for example, if some of you have pointed out that there may be a racial component to how students with disabilities are placed, right? So, a student with disabilities and behavioral challenges who is Black or African American may be placed in a more restrictive setting, right? Whereas it may be that there may be white students with disabilities and behavioral challenges who maybe could use a separate setting, but they're maintained in a general education classroom, perhaps disrupting the learning of their peers. It doesn't always fall along racial lines, but cultural capital certainly has a role to play in how students with disabilities and behavioral challenges are educated in schools in the US. So, again, we're going from a broader topic and coming down to a narrower set of research questions. Um, and there may be a social justice component that either is thought about as being part of the frame for the research overall, or it may be something that comes out as the research is conducted. Okay, some differences that are exposed by doing the research. Okay, can and should all certain problems be researched? Okay, these are questions that you'll ask yourself as researchers when you're deciding what problems should we address, or should you address in your setting. Do you have access to people and sites that can allow you to address that problem? Do you have the time, resources, and skills to carry out the research? Will your study fill a gap or void in the existing literature? Um, will your study replicate a past study but examine different participants and different research sites? Will your study extend past research or examine a particular topic more thoroughly? Will your study give voice to people not heard, silenced, or rejected in society? And finally, will your study inform practice? So, um, no study does all of those things. Usually, once you say, yes, I do have access to the people and sites that can help me address this uh, problem or examine this problem, explore or explain this problem. And yes, I do have the time, resources, and skills that I need. Your study will, um, 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 your study hopefully will do one of these five things. Fill some kind of gap, replicate, extend, give voice, or inform practice. And we're focused most in this class on informing practice. Research problems in quantitative and qualitative studies differ, not surprisingly, right? Because in one, you're trying to add to some body of knowledge which you believe as universal truth. And in another, you're trying to understand individuals' perspectives on their lives, right? And interpret, understand how people are interpreting the circumstances of their lives, right? I'll say, so you use quantitative research if your research problem requires you to measure variables, assess the impact of these variables on an outcome. Okay? We're not going to be doing much with testing theories or broad explanations. And, but quantitative research also, you use it when you want to apply your results to a large number of people. And by large, usually we're talking about um, either a very large school, okay, so with at least maybe several hundred students, or to a district, to an education service area, to a state, to the nation, okay? Qualitative research, we use qualitative research when we want to learn about the views of the people we plan to study, okay? We want to assess a process over time. We want to generate theories based on participant perspectives, or when we want to obtain detailed information about a few people or research sites. Okay. So one way of thinking of it is that quantitative research tends to be broad and qualitative research tends to be deep. Okay. So now let's talk about the statement of the problem section, or which is basically an introduction to a research study. These things that we've talked about, the topic and so on, are included in a statement of the problem section. We start with a broad topic, then we describe the research problem, the concern, the thing that needs the solution. Then we would talk about justification for the problem, like explaining why this problem is important and worthy of study. And usually that's evidence. Usually we use evidence from the literature or evidence from practical experiences in order to justify this problem as a problem for research. We might talk about deficiencies in the evidence. So, what's missing from the literature? What's missing from our practical experience? What do we need to know more about? And we would talk about the audience that would benefit from us conducting a particular research study. How will our study help researchers, educators, policymakers, and individuals such as those that we've studied, which is usually students? Okay, so there's an example here. I'm going to skip over that because I want to spend most of the time our time talking about a study that I actually did. And I did the study. This was my first major research project when I was pursuing my doctorate at Harvard. And I used national data to do a survey about teachers and how the teachers were trained. And so we're going to look at my first couple of paragraphs and see if I did what Creswell and Gutterman suggest in our textbook. Okay, so they say first you're going to write about the topic. Okay, in your first paragraph, you're going to talk about the general subject matter. You need to introduce it with general ideas so that the reader can relate. And I add that you may include definitions of key concepts because in education we have a lot of jargon, and you want to make sure that the general reader can understand what your research study is about by defining key concepts or key terms that you're going to use. There's a narrative hook to draw the reader in, right? We want to cause the reader to pay attention. We want to elicit an emotional or attitudinal response from the reader in order to cause the reader to continue reading our study. Yeah, because not everyone likes reading research reports. Um, right. Okay. So information that can be included in the narrative hook might be things like statistical data. It might be a provocative question. It might be something that highlights the need for research or describes the intent of the study. So let's look at my study. This was of alternatively certified teachers and see if I did those things. So I start out by saying, and my name was Ayana Key back then before I was married. So I start out by saying, in the United States, 20 to 30% of new teachers are drawn from alternative certification programs. Okay, and I have a citation there. And so I hit you with a statistic. Okay, so if this is a significant group of new teachers, right? And you get the sense, okay, this paper is going to be about alternative certification programs. And then I say, oh, this proportion is vastly larger than it was 20 years ago. Okay, vastly larger. All right, I'm trying to elicit kind of a response. Oh, it's growing. Okay, and then I give a definition essentially. As generally described, these programs differ from traditional certification programs in certain ways. They want to fulfill a specific geographic or content area shortage. They want to enlarge the teaching pool um, by recruiting a diverse group of teachers, and and participants can become full-time teachers after as little as a few weeks of pre-service training. Now, those of you who went through your training, for example, here at Augusta University, know that normally becoming a teacher in a traditional program takes years, and an alternatively certified teacher becomes a teacher in a few weeks. Okay, so hopefully I drew the reader in, right? Um, with the opening to my introduction. Next, the research problem. Okay, again, we're still in the opening paragraph. I want to identify an issue. What's the practical research problem or research-based research problem? And reference the problem using literature. And you see, I sprinkled literature throughout this introduction. Okay, so the research problem. Okay. Um, and I copied and pasted this out of the PDF, so I apologize for weird spacing. But there's this dramatic increase in the number of AC programs. So they were first developed in 1980s to address teacher shortages. And there were critiques of traditional teacher education programs. Um, and there was this increase because prospective teachers wanted the incentives associated with alternative certification programs. You could bypass a lot of the certification prerequisites, such as coursework, and most importantly, you could quickly get into the classroom instead of having these years of preparation before you could get into the classroom. So we get this dramatic increase, and the problem is kind of vague. It's not clear from what I'm reading here what's the problem. I mean, you get the sense that there are critics, there are opponents, so they kind of maybe two camps, a traditional and alternative camp. Um, yeah, but it's kind of vague in terms of what the problem. To my defense, the journal that this was in, the Journal of Teacher Education, there's a long there is a long list of articles that previous researchers had written about alternative certification and about the problems that plague either traditional or alternative certification. Okay, so let's see. Justification of the importance of the problem. Let's see. Justification based on what other researchers have found, justification based on workplace or personal experience, justification based on the experiences others have had in the work place. You can guess from what we've talked about so far that I'm probably going to be relying on what other researchers have found. So let's see in my justification what I say. However, differences between the training experiences of teachers in traditional and alternative programs could have implications for teachers' feelings of preparedness, their persistence in the teaching profession, and ultimately student outcomes. Ooh. So I'm saying, oh, maybe this is more the problem. There are these differences that could have consequences, could have effects on not only on the teachers themselves, their feelings of preparedness, their persistence in the profession, but could have an effect on students. So yeah, this is a problem. This is a justification. Yeah, this is a problem. It could affect students, and if you can justify your research by talking about students, then as an educator, that often makes a compelling study. Okay. Um, Deficiencies. Somehow there has to be a need. Okay, I say it could in the previous sentence. There sometimes has to be a need. Maybe there's past research or experience is not adequate. Maybe we need to extend research, replicate, explore, lift the voices of folks who are marginalized, add to practice, do something to extend. And usually you would identify 2 or 3 deficiencies. Or for short project like we're doing in this class, even 1 deficiency is fine. Okay. So I write, thus to understand the first link in the chain that connects teacher preparation to student outcomes, it is necessary to ask whether program features play a role in determining feelings of preparedness among alternatively certified teachers. So what I'm saying that there's a gap. Okay. We know that um, we know that traditional and alternative certification programs are different. For example, the number of courses may be different. The length of practice teaching may be different. Those were my main variables. Um, but we don't know what the effects of those differences are on how confident or how prepared the teachers feel. Particularly alternatively certified teachers feel. And I explore more in my literature review section that this idea that these feelings of preparedness may relate to student outcomes. Okay. All right. And then I give a little hint in this last sentence about my methodology in this study. Let's see. With the last sentence, I'm on slide 20. Um, Creswell and Gutterman say with your at the end you're going to talk about who will profit from reading your study, whether it's other researchers, practitioners, policymakers, or participant groups like parents, administrators, students, that kind of thing. I didn't do that in the introduction. I probably did it in the abstract. I'm assuming I did it in the abstract. I usually do. Okay, so I sort of did what Creswell and Gutterman said. Maybe not, certain things were not as clear in my study as they are going to be in yours. Okay, so finally, here's a reference. Again, that was in the Journal of Teacher Education. And so if you happen to be, um, on scholar.google.com, or better yet in our library databases, feel free to check it out. Okay. All right. Bye-bye.